Good afternoon and welcome to the News Roundup for Monday, December 8, 2025. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. The appalling fraud scandal in Minnesota continuing to grow by leaps and bounds as Representative Ilhan Omar steps up her defense of the Somali community, claiming they're actually victims of the crime. Our nation's borders are defending the Trump administration's sweeping crackdown in Minneapolis, saying the policies of Governor Tim Walz are allowing criminal immigrants to overrun the city. And President Trump vowing no more Mr. Nice Guy after pardoning a Democratic congressman accused of bribery and corruption, only to have the alleged felon announce he's running for office once again. Also, a federal lawmaker doubling down on claims by a former First Lady regarding our nation and the eventual likelihood of a woman commander-in-chief. And 47 holds court at a star-studded event in Washington where he pays long overdue tribute to a number of iconic American performers. All this and much more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin once again in Minnesota, where things are getting worse by the day for embattled Governor Tim Walz, testy Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, the beleaguered Democratic Party, and everyone else who's ducking for cover from the state's growing billion-dollar fraud scandal. You know, as we've been pointing out recently right here on this program, both Walz and Omar have been linked repeatedly to their failed oversight regarding a massive rip-off scheme involving a number of COVID-era charities. Many of those groups were run by Somali immigrants with direct ties to Congresswoman Omar, links which she continues to ignore. Rather than owning up to her role and allowing the situation in Minneapolis to fester and get completely out of hand, Omar now claiming that she's actually part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that is some pretty goofy math. The Congresswoman says she was one of the very first lawmakers to investigate this reprehensible scam, and this entire time, she's been pressing state officials for answers about how all of this money could disappear without setting off any alarm bells at all. That's what we all want to know, Ilhan, but isn't that part of your job to keep that from happening? She's also staunchly defending her city's Somali immigrant population, claiming that they are actually the victims, not the perpetrators of these despicable crimes. She goes on to say that her fellow Somali migrants are now Minnesota taxpayers and that they could have benefited greatly from all the money that was stolen as part of the ruse, even if it was a bunch of their own community members and fellow immigrants who pulled off the heist in the first place. And this is a bigger heist than the one they pulled in that movie Ocean's 11 all those years ago. Now, one cabinet member accuses Omar of trying to gaslight the American people with her gibberish. In the meantime, both Congress and the Treasury Department, they're now investigating the incompetence of Governor Walz and looking into how and why he utterly failed to safeguard taxpayer money. According to officials, the sprawling case currently involves nearly 80 defendants and includes what they call schemes stacked upon schemes. They say that though the biggest scandal involves criminals skimming nearly, check this out, $300 million from an organization set up to feed hungry children during the pandemic, other harmful scams targeted Minnesota's housing, autism, and Medicaid programs as well. Now, for their part, state lawmakers claim that the scandal has now grown to historic proportions because Walz and his team were both asleep at the wheel and afraid to look into reports of fraud due to political correctness concerning the Somali population and accusations of racial discrimination. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. You know, it's tough being a victim, and we kind of get it. It's tough, and it can be overwhelming, and for some, it can even be painful. Think of the poor slob who kicks somebody in the shin, and in the process, he or she hurts their big toe. Well, the kickee, not the victim, and if you're a member of Team Omar, it's the kicker who has suffered the great injustice, a bruised or perhaps broken toe. Now, look, for Omar to complain that many Somalis were the victims in this now legendary scam is perhaps accurate, but she's merely deflecting. You know, being gypped out of services has nothing to do with race, color, or creed. And needy Somalis in Minnesota, they've not been victimized any more or less than any other portion of that state's needy population. Now, important to point out that an enormous amount of fraud all happened in the Congresswoman's 5th District, and at last check, she's still dummying up, claims she knew nothing about what was going on. I suppose that's somehow plausible, but if she authentically knew nothing, then right about now would be a grand time for her to step aside and allow for a more competent individual to assume her congressional seat. As for Minnesota's allegedly honorable governor, Tim Walz, we never pass judgment, but this story is getting deeper and uglier every day, and the people of your fine state, sir, demand accountability. Also, thanks a bunch to the hundreds of people who've been writing in and commenting on this scam, and we are as outraged over this story as you are. Now, Producer Davey, on behalf of all taxpayers in Minnesota and elsewhere, I am demanding a tax refund. And what say you?
Well, this thing just seems to keep on getting bigger and bigger, and it's going to be interesting to see if they ever connect the dots right to Omar herself.
It's the gift that keeps on giving. Another thing to keep in mind, by the way, when Kamala Harris runs for president again in a couple of years, you do well to remember that she's the one who signed off on this Walz fella to be her co-pilot in the White House. Yeah, think about that, and if you would, please keep that in mind. All right, we'll stay on a bit of a related topic now and turn our attention to the federal crackdown on illegal immigrants, which is currently underway in Minnesota. Hey, Minnesota, we hope you're ready for your close-up. All eyes are on you right now. Border Czar Tom Homan is now stepping up to the plate, defending the Trump administration's massive deportation campaign, saying the law enforcement push, it's aimed at ridding our city streets of criminal illegal aliens and that it's taken place in order to safeguard our nation. Homan says his agency, ICE, is concentrating their efforts on the worst of the worst, illegal immigrants who are threats to public safety and national security. However, he also warns that any legal resident aliens who have felony convictions could be up for deportation as well. The Border Czar says they've specifically ramped up their activity in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area because despite Ilhan Omar's comments to the contrary, they know there's a large illegal Somali community here, and nevertheless, he says they're not targeting people based on their appearance, but are simply trying to arrest every single illegal immigrant they can find. It's the gig. Homan goes on to say that even though he doesn't know exactly how many illegal Somalis there are in the area, if it wasn't for Governor Tim Walz and the city's leaders, many of the people they're trying to track down would already be in jail. Also says the city's sanctuary policies require ICE to flood the zone with a large number of agents simply to get the job done. Now, according to authorities, there are currently around 80,000 Somali migrants living in Minnesota, with most of them living in the Minneapolis area. President Trump claims right now Somali gangs are terrorizing Minnesota, that billions of dollars are missing as a result, and that the land of 10,000 lakes rapidly turning into a money laundering mecca. Now, for his part, Governor Walz says that the Trump administration's efforts in Minnesota are nothing more than a goofy, outrageous PR stunt, and that indiscriminately targeting illegal immigrants, it doesn't solve anything, doesn't solve the crime problem that's plaguing the area. He says that, huh? Well, bless his little heart. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. This is the way we all see it panning out right now. Now, there are tons of things that Tom Homan has in common with failed presidential candidate Kamala Harris. She's the former border czar, and he's the current border czar. Actually, that's pretty much all they have in common. You will recall she failed miserably in her responsibilities, and Homan is, by all accounts, doing a bang-up job. Now, for anyone to suggest that the Trump administration in general, or Tom Homan in particular, is targeting any one segment of the population for deportation is unfounded and claims are nothing more than a distraction tool being used by Democrats. If the border czar is working on intel, which indicates there's a large number of illegal immigrants in certain parts of Minnesota, then he has to act on that intel, conduct investigations, detain those who are not there legally, and carry out his duties, which include deportation. It doesn't matter if those individuals are from Somalia, maybe China, Mexico, or pretty much anywhere else. The border czar and those who work with and under him are charged with securing the border, ensuring public safety, and safeguarding national security. For elected officials in Minnesota, across the hundreds, address the hundreds millions of dollars in fraud, and your state make restitution to those who've been shortchanged instead of trying to manipulate the narrative and bury the lead. You know what's going on in your state, and we do as well. Now, Producer Davey, you never bury the lead, and in my estimation, the border czar simply trying to do his job. And what are you thinking?
Well, you said it best, Bill. That guy takes his gig seriously. He's doing the best to clean up our country that he can, and he thinks that city needs some help.
It does need some help. And try as they might to get people to kind of look the other way, despicable crime is happening in a theme park called Walsneyland. Governor Walz is the ride operator, and people all over that region are saying, stop the ride. We've had enough, and we want off. Turning now to President Trump and a story concerning allegations of bribery, a presidential pardon, and a double cross, which proves that no good deed ever goes unpunished. 47 now expressing extreme regret over his recent pardon of Congressman Henry Cuellar of Texas after the lawmaker did an immediate about-face and announced that he plans to run for re-election to Congress and once again as a Democrat. Before getting that free pass from Trump, the 70-year-old Cuellar was facing a bunch of federal bribery, money laundering, and foreign agent charges for allegedly accepting more than $500,000 in graft money from Azerbaijan as well as Mexico. In a bit of a surprise last week, 47 gave Cuellar the break of a lifetime after receiving a desperate plea from the congressman's daughters. They claim the Biden administration charged their father because he was an outspoken critic of the former president's border policies. Well, for his part, Trump now says that at first he felt good about cutting Cuellar a break because the congressman was obviously being treated so unfairly by the vicious Democrats. However, the president now whistling another tune altogether, and he claims that by running as a Democrat in a highly competitive Texas district, Cuellar is displaying a complete lack of loyalty. Also says that voters in the Lone Star State, they're not going to appreciate the move, that the congressman's own daughters won't like it either, and that from now on, it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. Which, by the way, producer Davey, is the name of an old Alice Cooper song. You'll recall that one, yes?
Oh, it's a classic, Bill. Love that song.
They're all classics. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. It's always a good idea to put a 4-year-old child in charge of the cookie jar. What could possibly go wrong? Say what you will about 47, but at his core, he can be a pretty compassionate guy. And to provide a pardon to a compromised Texas Democrat, that's very generous. This Cuellar fella has never had Trump's back. He was facing substantial charges, and even though he's batting for the other team, the president signed off on a pardon for that guy. In hindsight, part of that pardon should have included an agreement that the congressman would take a job outside of politics, perhaps working in the oil industry, or maybe managing a bank just south of the border. Producer Davey, too soon?
Too soon, Bill.
It's too soon. I'm no career counselor, but in my humble estimation, I think he's clearly more well-suited for a position which keeps him out of the U.S. Capitol building. Hey, go ahead with your goofy scheme. Go ahead and run for Congress again. And if the fine people in the Lone Star State put you back to work, then I'm sure they're going to get their money's worth. Come on, Producer Davey. This guy, he scored a pardon from the opposition, and he'd do well to simply mosey along and get on with his life. Where are you on this guy? What do you think?
I don't get it, Bill. This guy never should have gotten a pardon in the first place. And if his act of gratitude is any indication, he was probably guilty of those allegations.
Yeah, it sounds kind of guilty to me. Put all the pieces together. President Trump, in my mind, though, was generous and to a fault by giving that guy a get-out-of-jail-free card. He let the Congress cat off the hook, threw a pardon his way, and now the knucklehead, follow what he's doing, wants to get back in the game. It's pure lunacy. And Texas, you need to demand better, and you can do better. Now, a couple of additional headlines we're keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, you've heard of this guy. Representative Jim Clyburn of South Carolina says he agrees with the former First Lady Michelle Obama's comments that America still isn't ready for a woman president. The Democratic lawmaker saying that a number of incredible female candidates they've already run and lost, that he thinks slow progress is being made, and that sooner or later he hopes we'll get there eventually. Well, perhaps we will, but you got to offer up someone better than that one, cackling Kamala Harris. And moving along, President Trump now vowing to keep America in the lead of the AI race by announcing plans for an executive order which establishes a unified federal rulebook regarding the development of artificial intelligence. And turning now to some troubling news concerning China. A Hong Kong doctor hiding right here in the U.S. claims that the Chinese Communist Party is currently hunting her down for revenge because she spread the theory that the COVID-19 virus originally came from a Chinese lab. Meantime, the tensions between Beijing and Tokyo ratcheting up to an extremely high level after a number of Chinese fighter jets locked their radar onto several Japanese fighter planes in the Pacific. And following a recent economic report, China's 2025 exports rising to an all-time high for the first 11 months of the year, with their trade surplus now, check this out, over $1 trillion. Over to the world of business and a quick peek at a couple of stories making waves in finance, also in commerce, and more. And leading off, a coalition of more than 200 environmental groups demanding a complete moratorium on new data centers here in the States and accusing the booming AI industry of jeopardizing our country's economic, climate, and water supply. Moving along, Paramount Skydance launching a hostile bid to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, and that aggressive move coming only days after streaming giant Netflix won a bidding war to purchase the organization, and President Trump claiming that any such deal would ultimately result in antitrust investigations. And rocking right along, legendary musician, look at that handsome devil, Gene Simmons of the rock band Kiss, preparing to testify before Congress just a few hours from now, and all in support of a new act which would shake up the music industry by requiring radio stations to pay performers whenever they play their songs. You might be a bit late to that game. Not too many radio stations left, and those who are still broadcasting are generally not playing too many Kiss songs. I think they hit their peak back in the 1970s. And now a quick gander at a bit of rock and roll showbiz news, and we kick things off today with a jam-packed, star-studded event in our nation's capital, hosted by none other than 47 himself in that goofy tux. President Trump taking a leisurely stroll down the red carpet with his wife Melania. They were hand in hand before bringing down the house as MC of the 48th Kennedy Center Honors. And among this year's recipients, Sylvester Stallone, the Sly Guy, also Kiss, we were just talking about them a moment ago, country singer George Strait, the great Gloria Gaynor, big hit back in the 1970s, I Will Survive, and a bunch more. And by the way, one guy who did not win a big prize was actor Kelsey Grammer, but that didn't keep him from tripping up anyway with the Frasier star calling 47 one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. Here's the deal. If Kelsey Grammer, who played Dr. Frasier Crane on TV's Cheers and on Frasier, says that President Trump is one of the greatest presidents we've ever had, then it must be true. Because when a pretend TV doctor speaks, I don't know about you, Producer Davey, but I tend to listen. And turning now to another prestigious award show, the Golden Globes, which is generally the biggest annual gathering of Hollywood luminaries on the entire planet. This year's highly anticipated nominations are just in, and they include dozens of popular movies, TV shows, and superstars. And among this year's nominees, that one, Julia Roberts, also that handsome character George Clooney, Leo DiCaprio, and a bunch of other big-time celebs. By the way, for the very first time, there's also a brand new Best Podcast category, and it's sure to be the highlights of the entire program. You know, truth is, Producer Davey, I am an enormous fan of the Golden Globe Awards. And correct me if I'm wrong, and this might be just a coincidence, but America's newest podcast, the News Roundup, with this guy, Bill Thomas, begins production. And then 5 minutes later, the Golden Globes introduce a podcast category. Come on, break it to me gently. Did we win?
Sorry, Bill. We didn't even get an honorable mention.
Oh, that kind of stings a little bit. Well, I never liked that award show anyway. And finally, we close things out by honoring a very sad anniversary. 45 years ago, on this very date, that former Beatles musician, big rock star John Lennon shot to death outside of his apartment building in New York City, leaving behind a long legacy of outstanding music. He was just 40 years old at the time. We were and are all of us enormous fans of John Lennon, and imagine Instant Karma as well, Woman, and all the rest. So just some of my favorite John Lennon songs. And if you haven't been there yet, you've got to put it on your bucket list. You got to visit Strawberry Fields in Central Park, just across the street from the Dakota, his apartment complex. Also, if you have a free minute, we'd love to hear about any fond memories you have about either John Lennon or the Beatles. And if you would, please leave us a note in the comments section. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the Monday edition of the Big News Roundup. And before we go, as we do each and every day right here on the program, I'd like to share with you a very notable quote. And these inspiring words come to us today from George Harrison, who said, "The Beatles saved the world from boredom." Yeah, they kind of did. And Brother Harrison was an English musician who achieved fame as the lead guitarist of the Beatles. He also influenced the band's music with his infusion of spirituality into their songs. And it seemed fitting that we honor the group's legacy today by giving him the last word. Fine job as well in the Traveling Wilburys, George Harrison. And time now for us to bust on out. But before we go, please don't forget the News Roundup motto. Ask not what your podcast can do for you. Instead, ask what you can do for your podcast. And all we ask you to do is push that little button right over there, the subscribe button. And that way you never miss even a single episode. Also appreciate it a great deal if you'd hit up a couple of your friends, coworkers, family members. Ask them to subscribe to the channel as well. And now it looks like our time is officially up. We made it through a Monday. Have an awesome day today. Please stay safe. Let's all continue to watch out for one another. And with that, we're going to dim the lights. We're going to fade to black, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow afternoon.